Welcome everybody to our Navoni member-only event. Our topic today is best practices for notes and documentation. Now, as you all are aware, if you've been using Dentrix for a while, you know that there is probably 10 to 12 places in Dentrix where you could make a note, you could document information about a patient, make sure that you're educating and informing your team members about things about patients and treatment and finances and all kinds of personal things about patients. So today our topic is to find out where those best places are, best practices. So if we think about all the different note places in Dentrix, one of the first things we want to do is distinguish between what's clinical documentation and what's administrative documentation, because there's a big difference between the two. Clinical documentation is a legal part of your record. So we have to make sure that your clinical documentation is being locked up for security reasons. And what I mean by locked up is it gets locked up into history so that maybe during the month-end process, it's putting that information into history so that you cannot edit that information any longer, or you can't make any kind of deletions or anything to that note or that piece of documentation. So clinical documentation definitely falls under that definition, so that if it's clinical and it's part of the legal record, we got to make sure that we can secure that piece of information either with the month-end process or with a signature. And that's really important. So we're going to talk about those places in Dentrix that meet that definition. And then the administrative documentation it's still important. It's still critical to your everyday practices, but it doesn't necessarily fit that legal documentation definition. So it's something that you want to make sure you're informing your team about, but it might not be something that you would be subpoenaed for, or something that might make it into a legal representation. And then the other thing we want to talk about is what is appropriate to document in this place, and why would you put it there instead of over here, and how does it affect other places in the Dentrix module? So if you make a note, in this place in Dentrix, how does it affect other things? And then another thing that we don't want to do is we don't want to drive our team crazy with notes everywhere. And we want to make sure that we're consistent with our documentation and that everybody is making notes in the same places. So one thing that we definitely want to do as a action plan for the team, and for something you can start after this webinar is over, is let's create a document that outlines for your team all the Dentrix note places. Like, this is all the places we could make notes in Dentrix and what would go in these places. And that might be slightly different for every office. So I'm going to definitely give you some recommendations on what's appropriate where, but it's definitely going to be up to you to outline exactly what the specifics are for your practice. And then definitely Q&A throughout the presentation. Whenever you have a question, please raise your hand. I'm monitoring the Q&A window, so anytime you have a question, please ask me, and I can definitely unmute you and you can ask your question live, or just post up your question in the Q&A box, and I'll make sure that I get to your question before the end of the webinar. But first thing I want to know is we're going to do a quick little poll here. And so the question is, if you can all see the poll here, answer the question, does your team make notes in the same places? You know, do you find that you're searching all over the place trying to find that phone conversation or that financial arrangement, or do you find that your team is pretty much on board? I'd like to kind of get a little bit of idea from all of you. It seems like right now we've got about a 50-50 percentage. Right now, 67% all on the same page, 25% no, we struggle to find information. So that's good. You know, I definitely also want to hear from you if you have any tips and tricks to help us. We can all learn from each other, and definitely always want good tips and tricks from all of you as well. Great. All right. So the consensus is about 75%, we're all on the same page. 25%, no, we struggle for information. So let's see. Let's move over to our Dentrix software. Just so all of you know, I am currently running the latest version of Dentrix. I am on the beta version of G7. So for any of you that are, you know, using a Dentrix version prior to G7, you may see things that look slightly different in your software, but just so you know, I am on a beta version of G7. I have had a few things happen, but hopefully it'll all be clean today. So first, let's start with the administrative side. So let's kind of go through some of those administrative topics first. And let's see, we'll start with the appointment book since we're already on the appointment book. There's a few different note places in Dentrix for the appointment book and for appointments. I'm sure that most of you are using these note places, so this might not be a big surprise to you, but just want to make sure that everybody's on the same page with you know, what's appropriate in these places, what's not appropriate, and where these notes will show up in other places in Dentrix. You know, sometimes we just don't know what we don't know, and I think it's good to always get a little refresher, even though you may think you know where all the note places are. So the first one I want to start with is here in the upper left corner of your appointment book. I'll put a big circle around it. Right here is the note button on the appointment book, upper left corner. And so when you click on that note, it does open up a blank piece of paper. You can type notes here. Remember to register for Navoni webinar today. And then maybe you put the link in there or something. It could also be good for doctor's birthday, potluck, and then you have a list of everything, you know, Katie is bringing spaghetti. And then, you know, whatever you want to do here. This is a note for the day. It doesn't apply to a patient. It doesn't get linked up to anything other than this day. It's just a big old Post-it note, and you can write whatever you want here. A lot of offices will use this also for maybe you're running a patient's credit card on a specific day, like the patient wants their credit card run on the 15th and the 30th of every month. So maybe you make a note here, run Mrs. Jones credit card today, okay? Do not put the credit card number in here. Do not put the care credit number in here. This is not a secure location in Dentrix. So I think it's good you put a little note to yourself to run the credit card, but please don't put any credit card information in this box because it is not an encrypted type of secure location at all. Maybe you use it, I used to use it in my practice for our morning huddle. We would use it to, if there were maybe some questions from yesterday, maybe I was missing a narrative for tooth number 30 for Greg's crown yesterday, and I wanted to remind my doctor to do the narrative for that. I would put that in this box. Maybe my hygienist missed a clinical note from yesterday, I would put that in here because it'd be good, pertinent information for our morning huddle. So this is a great morning huddle spot. One reason I like this note box for the morning huddle is that it will show up on your daily huddle report. So if you are doing the daily huddle report for your morning huddle, you can elect to have this note box show up on your morning huddle. And if you print a copy of your day, so if you do a printed schedule for any places in the office, maybe you have a lab that doesn't have a computer workstation, so you do a printed schedule, you can elect to have this note print on your schedule for the day. So in addition to the note showing up here, you'll also notice that it turns yellow as soon as you write something in there. You can elect to have this note print on the daily schedule if you print one, or your daily huddle report. All right, so that's all about that note box. Now the other note box that is on the appointment book is this one right here. And again, you probably already know how to use this note. It's very effective for communicating with the rest of your team. I love this note box for the patient's copay, where you could just put in, you know, what does the patient owe today? Because I love cross-training for the entire team when it comes to collecting money. I never want the patient to be dismissed out of the practice or dismissed from their appointment today without double checking what their copay is today. And so this note box on the appointment is perfect for that. It's also a great spot for, you know, new patient info. How did they find you? It's great for maybe the patient needs to be out by a certain time. Anything that is relatable to this visit, this appointment. Also, this information on this note box will show up if you are using route slips or visit forms. Other than that, this note box only just stays right with this appointment. It does not transfer anywhere other than the route slip and the visit form. I have many people that when they you know, move an appointment to the wait will call list, then they start making their follow-up notes on the appointment. Not my favorite thing to do. The reason I don't like to make notes here for follow-up calls, if you're working like your unscheduled list or something like that, is because then if you ever delete the appointment off of the unscheduled list, then you would lose all these notes, okay? So, you know, there's a better spot for that we're gonna talk about in just a few minutes. But this note box is perfect for information about this appointment only. All right. Awesome. Now let's go to the family file. So in the family file, there's a few different note places here in the family file. One is the patient note box here, okay? So the patient note, I see lots of different things in this patient note section. It's interesting that a lot of offices will use this for the patient's medical history. They will put the medication list in here. They'll put their allergies in here. And we have to remember that the patient note box is not a legal part of the document. It is not, it cannot be locked up with a signature. It doesn't get locked up ever with anything. There's no move to history. There's no chronological history here. You can insert the date line. However, you know, it's just kind of a running list of information. We also have to remember that there is a character limit to this box. So if you are putting lots and lots of information in here, you will eventually max out on characters. Not that that really, you know, makes a difference, but just so you know that. This box is very appropriate for relationship building. It's great for, you know, reminding yourself about the patient's hobbies and their vacations, and they took the kids to Disneyland in 2017. It might be they're in the doctor's book club or something. You know, it's great for relationship building. It's also great for, I do have some pediatric offices that will use this box for putting the insurance eligibility for Medicaid here, because the eligibility for Medicaid can change on a dime. It can change from one day to another. And so a lot of my pediatric offices who are taking Medicaid will put the patient's eligibility in here. They'll just put yes or no. And it'll either be yes, they're on Medicaid, or maybe they're on CHIP, or they're on, you know, DSHS, or they're on, you know, some kind of a state plan, because it can change so frequently. I would not recommend putting like all the insurance benefits in here, but it might be that you just put the eligibility in here. It could be that maybe this particular patient has some specific to this insurance plan that is not for the whole group. And then you might put patient-specific insurance information in here. Maybe they have a waiting period until, you know, October of 2018 or something. And that might be appropriate here, because this note box will also show up on your patient route slips and your visit forms. So we have to remember to don't put any derogatory information here. Don't put any anything that you wouldn't want the patient to read, because it's possible that patients could get a hold of those route slips. You know, they could see them sitting on the counter. So you want to make sure this stays very patient friendly in this box. We also have many offices that kind of, I would say, stereotype patients into personality categories. Like maybe this is an A patient, or this is a very analytical patient. They need lots of details, or you know, things like that you might want to just remind yourself about this patient. Because again, this box will show up on the patient visit form and the route slip. All right. Any questions so far? All right, the next note box we're going to look at is in the insurance. So if we have a patient who has an insurance plan, in the coverage table, there is a note box right here, okay? Now this note box on the insurance plan is specific to this group, okay? It's not patient specific, it is group specific. So it's important that you put generalized things in here. Maybe there is a sealants covered to age 14. Prophy 6 month only. You know, FMX 5 years. Things like that. Is there a non-duplication clause? Is there a some kind of do they coordinate benefits? Things like that. So this is plan specific. Now, what I love about this note box, and many of you may not know this, but that insurance note box also shows up on the patient chart. And it can also show up on the visit form. So if you're on the patient's tooth chart, right down here, let me put a big circle around it for you. Right here, See that insurance case amount tab there on the patient chart? This is also in the treatment planner as well. But if you click on that insurance case note, you will also see a button right here in the tab right here. See that primary insurance notes? That will show you those notes that you have put in the patient's in coverage table note box. So I love this because our clinical team, they live in the chart. And we don't always want them to go searching around Dentrix trying to find out if fluoride is covered or if they can take an FMX today. So if you can keep this insurance plan note box as accurate and up to date as possible, then it will really help out your clinical team, you know, hunting you down, trying to find out if they can do an FMX today or if fluoride is covered. So, you know, if you can try and keep this information accurate, then that will really help out everybody with, you know, knowing, you know, as best you can what the benefits are for this patient's plan. Now, of course, I work with many offices all over the country, and you know, we don't want to spend a lot of time finding out if fluoride is covered, you know, because that's a time sucker out of your day for sure. So, you know, if you don't know, if it's not in the plan note and you don't know if something's covered, then, you know, my conversation with the patient would be something like, you know, we're not sure if your insurance covers fluoride today. I do know that the most out of pocket you'll have is, you know, $35. You know, whatever your full fee is for fluoride, that's what I would say to the patient. And then let them decide, because you don't always know if everything's covered. But that's the insurance plan note. And if we go back to the family file, I know we're kind of going fast, but we've got lots of note places to talk about. But definitely raise your hand or put a question in the Q&A box if you want me to stop and clarify anything for you. Now, there is another note box I want to talk about, and the reason you might not know about it is because we don't really use it all that much. But inside the continuing care, if you go into your continuing care and you click edit, there's a motivational note box here. And the reason they created this note box was for back in the day when we still used to print postcards. And, you know, you could say something like, your hygienist, Mary, is looking forward to seeing you. Or it could be something like, remember to take any prescribed medicine on the day of your appointment. You know, we can't put anything that is protected in this box, so you couldn't say something like, you know, Dr. Johnson is going to be looking at that broken tooth on the lower right for you. You couldn't put anything like that because that's protected diagnostic information. You wouldn't want that on a postcard. But just so you know that this motivational note was created specifically for postcards. It could also show up on your continuing care list. So we used to use this in my office, and the way we used to use it was way before we even started using clinical notes. And that was where we would put what the patient needed next time. So me and my counterpart that we worked up front together, this is where we would look to find out what the patient needs for their next appointment. You know, do they need a 6-month or a 4-month prophy, bite wings, or an FMX or fluoride? Whatever they needed, we would put in this motivational note. And that was our administrative way of knowing what the patient needed, so we wouldn't have to get up and pull the chart every time. That was back in the day when we still used paper charts. There's a better way to do that now, but just so you know that this motivational note could show up it is a searchable field for if you're doing letters or postcards or any kind of a custom quick letter. This is a mergeable field into a letter, just so you all know that. All righty, I think the other thing we're going to talk about, because we're still on administrative notes, is we're going to flip over to the ledger. So in the ledger, there's a couple note places in the ledger. One is the guarantor note. And the guarantor note, we have to remember the guarantor note is a note for the entire account. Okay, it's not patient specific, it's account specific. So this could be something like, I love this place for if you have some kind of a financial agreement with the patient, like maybe per doctor, the patient gets a 20% discount or something, or reminding yourself to send grandma in Montana an extra billing statement. Some offices, like pediatric offices, I've been known to see them put who's the financially responsible parent, and like who do they have who do they have a financial agreement with. I've also seen offices put credit card on file here, but do not put the number here, all right? There is no place in Dentrix right now, unless you're using Dentrix Pay, to put a credit card on file that is secure, and that is not, there's no encrypted location in Dentrix where we could store the credit card or the care credit number. So you could definitely put that the patient or the account has a credit card on file here, and then store that credit card somewhere else that's in a secure location. But that's kind of what the guarantor note is. It's for the entire family. And then down here below, we've got a billing statement note. So if you just received insurance payment and now the patient has like a copay, you could put something like insurance has paid in full, this is your balance. And then you could, force a statement out of the ledger, or if you're doing billing statements on a daily basis, then that statement note would show up on your next statement run. And then you can also give it a deadline. You want this note on the billing statement to run until this day. So it gives you, a cutoff period. All right, you'll also notice here you've got a button here for statement notes. You could create some create some templated statement notes if you wanted to, if you had any desire to do that. But also remember that this statement note here is patient or account specific. It's not for the entire database. All right. So the next note on that's kind of generalized, it shows up on every Dentrix module. There's two of them we're going to talk about. That is the pop-up. Let me see if I can get one of these to pop up at me. I had one popping up at me earlier. Yeah, pop-ups are probably the biggest challenge in most offices, is the pop-up notes. So this pop-up, you'll notice here on the appointment book, you see this little flag, yellow flag. That means that the patient has a patient alert, and so patient alerts are located here. Whoops, change my. Right here on the toolbar, or you can go right-click patient alerts right here. So patient alerts are, again, cannot be considered part of the legal record because they can be edited, deleted, or changed at any time. And so it wouldn't be a great place for your health histories. I do see a lot of offices put medication lists in the patient alerts. I think the patient alerts are great for informing your team, like smacking somebody aside the head with a 2x4 before they are going to treat the patient or pick up the phone and call them for something. So we have to remember that this note box cannot be locked down with a signature, or it also doesn't get locked up like with your month-end process. So if this was going to be a true medical alert, I think it might be something like patient carries an EpiPen. Or it might be, it could be pre-med for, knee. And then it just triggers you that, oh, I need to make sure that this patient took their pre-med. Or if they have an allergic reaction in your practice, you know that they have an EpiPen on them somewhere. Or, it's something that you really want to know about this patient that's critical to you treating them or picking up the phone and talking to them. Maybe they have privacy restrictions. So the only person you can talk to in their family is the spouse, or, something like that. So these patient alerts have to be really important. Now, the second piece to that is, where should you have the pop-up show up in Dentrix? Now, I go into offices all the time and I see that they click all right? If you click all, you will drive your team crazy, all right? So we want to be very selective of where this note should pop up. So if it's a true medical alert, we probably want it to pop up in the patient chart and maybe prescriptions, okay? Because, the rest of your team probably doesn't need to see this pop up in the ledger or pop up when they open up the treatment planner or something like that. Now, since this one has pre-med on it, maybe you want to have it if you're going to edit the existing appointment, because maybe you want to remind the patient about their pre-med, or see if you need to phone it in to their pharmacy or something like that. And so that's a possibility, but please don't click all. The only time I've ever clicked all is if I have a patient that maybe filed bankruptcy and they're still a patient of ours. And but other than that, or if you've dismissed them out of the practice for some reason and you still wanted to keep that alert on there. But for the most part, you're never going to click all. You need to be really selective of where this note will pop up, okay? Other than that, you can insert the date line and put a list of things here. I love this note for maybe scheduling issues. Maybe the patient needs a morning reminder, or maybe this patient, you can only call their mobile number for confirmations. Or I also love it for making sure the patient is comfortable in your office. Maybe they like having a blanket, or they like music when they do restorative procedures, or maybe they're in a wheelchair. So I think those kinds of things are appropriate for pop-ups. But we have to remember that this note box should not be used for the health history update, okay? It's just not appropriate for that. And because it cannot be locked down with a signature, and it cannot get secured with your month-end process. All right. Any questions so far? All right, the other general note box we want to look at is the office journal. Okay, for those of you that have been following me for the last 12 years that I've been a Dentrix trainer, I absolutely love the office journal for administrative phone calls, follow-up notes with patients. The reason I love the office journal is it is on every Dentrix module. Let me just make a big circle for it right here. This is the Office Journal. It's the blue book. You will also find the Office Journal on every report that you run in Dentrix. So if I was to open up the Treatment Manager, you would find the Office Journal at the top of this report here. If you were to open up your continuing care list, you'll find the Office Journal here at the top of the continuing care list. If you open up your appointment list feature, this might look different if you're not on G6, so this is the new Dentrix appointment list. You'll also notice that the Office Journal is on every Dentrix report that you can run. And that's why I love the Office Journal, is because you can't escape it. It just haunts you everywhere. The Office Journal is great for documenting phone calls for patients. You know, this is probably one of the biggest struggles that offices have, is especially if you have multiple team members in your practice. You know, we have, I see a few people online today. We have one of our Seattle offices who's online today with us, and she knows how important that Office Journal is. She is, you know, Heather, who's online with us today, she's the financial coordinator in the practice, and she makes notes in the Office Journal so that her team member, you know, Jessica or Jackie, can see her notes if she's talked to a patient about a billing statement or a financial concern, and she can see notes from her team members if they have been following up with the patient about unscheduled treatment. So it's a great non-verbal way to communicate with your team. And so you can come in here and make a journal entry. Here's one of our pop-ups. You know, make sure that you assign it to, you know, your name. And, you know, the conversation might be about the unscheduled appointment. And it might be, you know, just left message on mobile phone. It dates and timestamps it for you, and then the rest of your admin team can see that phone call note. The other thing I love about the Office Journal is that not only does every patient have an Office Journal, but every team member has an Office Journal. So if you were going here to the Office Manager and opened up the journal, then I could see, what does my journal look like? And I can see here's that phone call that I just made to Shelly about her unscheduled appointment. All right, so just a great like to-do list or follow-up, or just kind of get a gauge of, you know, how many people did I call last week? You know, it seemed like I was on the phone a lot. So it's just really a great note place for documentation for those administrative things. All right, let's see. You guys still don't have any questions, so you must be doing good. All right, I'm going to move on now to clinical documentation now. So a couple places for clinical places. Now, when we think of clinical, we have to remember that this type of documentation does need to become part of the legal record. And what that means is that it either gets locked down with your month-end process, or you can lock it up with a signature, okay? So when we look at the patient's medical alerts, you know, the red plus, so, you know, here is the patient's medical alerts, the health history. This may look a little bit different than it does on your system because this is a G7 upgrade. But if you go into the red plus, like on your family file, oh, this is going to look a little different for you too. But the little red plus is where you can add your medical conditions for this patient. So maybe this patient has asthma or some kind of cancer, and we're adding that to their medical alerts. This is the red plus alerts. And then we can also add a health history note. Patient has breast cancer. But again, I just want to be clear that this medical alert section is still not like a secure location. It's still for viewing purposes only. It's a great viewing place. It's great to see what the patient's active medical conditions are, what their active allergies are, and if there's any notes. But again, this section still does not get locked down into history, or there's no kind of signature assigned to it. So let's look at some of the clinical documentation as we go into the patient chart. So there are 3 places in Dentrix that can get locked up into history for security reasons to become part of your, quote, legal record, okay? The first place is with your clinical note. Okay, so down here in the lower section of your patient chart, down here, we're on this clinical note tab here. And the clinical notes are for documenting what happened to the patient today. You know, what kind of anesthetic did you use? What was their hygiene status? All those, the diagnosis, the reason for their appointment today. So when we do a clinical note and, you know, we're documenting, let's just go through one of our templates here. Let's see if I have a good one in here. You know, we're documenting anesthetic and, you know, maybe we're putting it on this lower right. We used 4 carpioles and 0.3. And, ooh, this is a good one here. All right. What kind of needle? Wow, this one's detailed. Okay, we've got this clinical note on our anesthetic here. And when you do a clinical note, the clinical note is going to get locked up in 2 ways. It's either going to get locked up with your month-end process, or you can assign a signature to it. So I can sign it here as the doctor, and as soon as I lock it up with a signature, now this has become part of my legal record. Okay, so that's one of the 3 places where you could document clinical information and it becomes part of the legal record. Another place is in your treatment planning, and this is one of my favorite places for documenting the diagnosis. So for example, let's say you're treatment planning a couple crowns for patient. So when you open up the procedure code, this is another note place in Dentrix that everybody should know about, okay? This note box right here is perfect for the diagnosis, okay? You'll also notice there's a diagnosis here, but it's actually not being implemented yet. It's coming, so I want everybody to know that diagnosis codes are coming in the dental world, but right now all we really have right now is narratives that we can use. So this note box here is great for the diagnosis. So it might be existing crown, 10 plus years old, recurrent decay, maybe ill-fitting, whatever the diagnosis is, the reason why you have to do that crown. Now, when we go back here to the progress notes, you'll notice that there's now a note on that procedure code. I'm going to pull this up a little bit so you guys can see. All right, see this note right here? Let me highlight it for you. Right here. See that? That's the note I just put on that procedure code. Now, the reason I love putting the diagnosis there is because that note box is also one of the 3 places that will get locked up with your month-end process. As soon as you set complete this crown, that note sticks with that procedure code. So when you set complete that crown on tooth number 2 and you do your month-end process the following month, then that note does get locked up into history, so it does become part of the legal record. This note on the procedure code also can transfer to the insurance claim. Let me show you how that works. So let's say, for example, I set complete that crown. Okay, now I go to the ledger and I do an insurance claim for that. All right. Now, when I open up the insurance claim and I go into the remarks for unusual services and I go to notes from procedures, see, here's that note right there that I can put on my claim. Oh, you don't need all this other stuff. But that note that I just put on the procedure code during treatment planning can now get assigned to my insurance claim when I send out that claim. Pretty cool, huh? And then when you run month end, that note on the procedure code, the note on the procedure code will get locked up into history right there. So that's the second note box that is considered part of the legal record. All right, any questions so far? You guys doing good? All right, perfect. All right, so we've got clinical note, we've got the procedure note. Now the next piece is, I guess you could think of it as a note place because you definitely would make a lot of documentation here. And it's also the third place that can get locked up with a signature, and that's the questionnaires. I love the questionnaire module for the health history update. I also love it for any kind of forms, like your consent forms, your new patient forms. I also worked with a oral surgery office recently, and they required a pretty extensive outpatient form that required 3 signatures according to their attorney. And so they're like, what are we going to do in Dentrix to capture 3 signatures for our legal documentation for when we do oral sedation? And the questionnaire module solved that for them. So they had extensive documents that we turned into questionnaires, and they were just beautiful because they could have their assistant sign the document, they could have their doctor sign the document, and they could have the patient, the release, who they were releasing this patient to after oral sedation, they could sign the document. So they could capture up to 3 signatures on a questionnaire, which was fantastic. Let's see, we have a question. We had a restoration recommended a few years ago, never was completed, case was rejected, now the tooth needs to be extracted. If we delete the rejected case, we lose the notes. Absolutely. So it's important that you never delete anything out of the treatment plan. Now, you want to make sure that in that situation that, you know, your clinical note would also have that representation of the diagnosis and the patient's lack of acceptance for treatment. And, you know, we have to remember that patients can choose not to comply with treatment options. And if they lose the tooth, you know, that is their fault for not going ahead with treatment. And so your clinical note would need to have documentation that states, what's the word I'm thinking of? You know, results if treatment is not rendered, patient could lose the tooth, patient understands ramifications of not proceeding with treatment. You know, those kinds of things would be documented in your clinical note for sure. But as far as notes on the procedure code, I would definitely, that would be like the clinical reason why that tooth needs to be have a restoration on it, because it also is really good for your admin team. You know, anybody that is reaching out to patients with unscheduled treatment, they need to have a clear place to look for that diagnosis, that reason why. And that's why I like that note box. But you are totally correct. If you reject a case, that note would just stay on that procedure code. But again, the nice thing about rejecting the case is that you can document, you know, what the reason why the patient is rejecting the case. Maybe it's that they've left the practice, or it's that they decide not to do the treatment. In that case, you could also do a refusal of treatment consent form if you have one of those on file. So that's definitely a good point for sure. So thank you for that information. Let's see if we have any other. All right. So let's look at the questionnaire module really quick. Our webinar, live webinar that we're doing in June is going to dive deeper into the questionnaire module. So I'm going to briefly go over a questionnaire module for you really quick. And then in June, we're going to dive a lot deeper into this questionnaire module. But I just want to point out that if you do let's say you're doing a medical dental history, and you put information in here, you know, who's their primary care physician, Dr. Smith, and, you know, you check mark, you've got some other things in here, and health issues or allergies, you could put none. And then you submit it. So here's your signature. Oh, this, of course, this form's not set up for signatures. I'm sorry about that. But this is where you can sign and lock up the document, so it actually becomes part of the legal record. If you are doing any kind of surgery or oral sedation, then I would highly recommend having a couple signatures, maybe the assistant and the doctor, or the doctor and the patient. If you're in an oral surgery office and you're doing oral IV sedation and you're releasing the patient to a driver, maybe you do need that third signature. So the thing I love about the questionnaire is that you can lock it up with a signature, and it keeps this really beautiful chronological history of all these forms for the patient. You know, it could be their new patient forms, which also require a signature. It could be all their consent forms, which also require signatures. All the health histories, you know, you do a health history at every hygiene visit. Maybe you don't need to capture a signature for that health history, but you sure as heck need that chronological history of your health history. And what I love about these forms is as soon as you do a new one, it locks the old one up into history. So then you cannot delete it, which is beautiful. So that's the questionnaire module. We're going to dive a lot deeper into the questionnaire module in our next webinar. All right, there's one more note box that I totally forgot. It's on the administrative side, but it popped into my head when I looked at this insurance claim. So I do want you to know about this status, this box right here, this claim status note, and how that is used in your management of your claims. So when you click into this claim status note, you have this note box right here. So this note, if you're using Dentrix eClaims, this note box will keep track of every time you batch this claim, print the claim, send the claim, resend the claim. It keeps track of all that information for you. Now, just my 2 cents, if you're using another software or clearinghouse for your claims, you should never have to resend a claim, because Dentrix eClaims always gives you a confirmation number that you can use to track your claims, your eClaims. So this note box is great for putting that NEA number. If you're doing an electronic attachment, you could put the NEA number here. You could also put, in the Dentrix world, the eClaims have a document control number, so which is called the DC number. So this is a great spot to put the DC number or the NEA number for tracking purposes. This would also be a great spot where you would put, you spoke to the rep, payment on the way, or something like that. This note box will also transfer to your insurance aging report, okay? So if you are doing an insurance aging report and you select to include, let me bring it up right here, include status notes, all right here, that is the status note on the claim. So if you are doing your insurance aging report, this will include any kind of those status notes that you have been typing on your claims. All right, let me check the Q&A box, see if there is any more questions we need to cover. All right, that was a lot. All right, you will all get an action plan of what you can implement right away. Get your whole team on the same page and create a SOAP, or not a SOAP, a SOP sheet for your office manual, so everybody knows where to put notes, why we would put notes there, where they show up in other places in Dentrix, what's considered a clinical documentation opposed to a admin documentation. So we went through lots of stuff today. You can join us next week on our Ask the Experts if any questions come about from this webinar. So please reach out to me directly, message me through Navoni, or join us on our Ask the Experts next week. But I appreciate everybody being here today. I hope that you have a fantastic rest of your week, and let me know of other topics or any kind of webinars that you would love to see in Navoni. We could definitely make that happen for you. You'll get your recording here within 24 hours. That will also include the CE code for today. So I appreciate everybody. Have a great one.